is a Labour landslide. It is a Tory bloodbath. That is not overplaying it. That is not an exaggeration of what has happened, what the British people have said in their votes today. The British people have spoken and they've said goodbye Rishi Sunak, hello Keir Starmer.
When Labour won the landslide election, the loveless landslide, I was absolutely delirious. They're so happy you just couldn't believe it.
We did it!
I had the cold sweats, I sought some medical assistance.
I just thought, it's going to happen, it has happened, here we are, what's next?
We will carry the responsibility of your trust as we rebuild our country.
They were promising the world.
There is so much work to be done to turn around both our economy and our public services.
And for 14 years, they sat in the wings, in the shadows.
OK, so Labour's won the landslide. Who's going to be in the cabinet?
I am going to return.
And I'm proud to serve as His Majesty's British Ambassador to the United States of America.
I didn't think for 1 minute they'd have that idiot David Lammy as Foreign Secretary.
We've got a business secretary who's never been in business. We've got Chancellor of the Exchequer that can't add up.
It's got worse and worse and worse.
I haven't even got to Angela Rayner, who's actually not as bad as everybody thought she might be, because everybody else is so awful. It's literally an unmitigated disaster, hilariously so.
So there he was, day one, the Rwanda scheme. Everybody knew about the Rwanda scheme. It's never going to be perfect, and even those that supported it knew that this could take a lot of money, a lot of effort, big political will. And Starmer came in and said, day one, Rwanda is dead and buried.
The Rwanda scheme was dead and buried before it started. It's never been a deterrent. Everybody has worked out, particularly the gangs that run this, that the chance of ever going to Rwanda was so slim, less than 1%. And I'm not prepared to continue with gimmicks.
Part of the reason that the election was called, I've been told by senior people in Rishi Sunak's number 10, was that they knew the Rwanda scheme wouldn't get past human rights legislation. They wanted to do it and they wanted to test it and essentially say, give us the mandate to do it. They knew they weren't going to get it. Keir Starmer knew as soon as he got in that he could get rid of the Rwanda scheme. He's done that and we're still dealing with the consequences.
OK, Keir, but you might have thought a little bit about the British taxpayer before you so impetuously ditched this scheme, because the British taxpayer had invested £700 million preparing for the Rwanda scheme.
Only scheme that was out there offering perhaps a semblance of solution to this enormous ongoing problem.
More and more migrants have come to Britain because the deterrent that was there now isn't.
Like everyone else, I wasn't surprised when Keir Starmer decided to scrap the Rwanda scheme. He said he was going to do it. What I was surprised by was the fact he had absolutely nothing to replace it with, or a border force that already existed. Chatting to Emmanuel Macron, well, that worked out well.
The Rwanda scheme did not fail. It did not start.
Right.
And subsequently, now we've learned that almost certainly it actually, even the threat of it, even the spectre of it, was starting to have an effect.
And of course, everybody else now is going, actually, Rwanda looks all right. Trump's thinking about sending people to Rwanda. Other countries like Denmark, I think, are sending people there as well. So, yeah, I mean, it was obviously an ideological decision. He didn't know whether he wanted to try it. He just knew he had to kill it. And ever since then, he's been trying to find another third country to send people to. He's had a look at Serbia. He's had a look at Albania. I think he's looking at the Czech Republic. Almost anywhere but Rwanda.
It is good news that today a man suspected of being a significant supplier of small boat equipment has been arrested. And it shows that our approach of working with international partners to smash the people smuggling gangs is bearing fruit.
One guy.
Yeah, one guy, and that'll teach those people smuggling gangs.
That's all of
Sorry,
it.
gangs.
The people schmiggling puns, or the people what would that? The people smash. The people smash. The smash. The fact that our Prime Minister stands up and announces, like he's presenting Crime Watch, that, oh, look, we've arrested a man today, isn't that good? Yes. It's like, this is an international cartel of global criminality worth billions of pounds to people, and our Prime Minister is patting himself on the back that we caught one of those rotters today.
We use that clip all the time. because not only is it when he says the snaggling guns, which is brilliant, and real Starmer-esque kind of, absolute and utter illiteracy. But he talks about this guy, a very key man who they've arrested, who was apparently in charge of smuggling boat parts. So we nicknamed him Napoleon Boat Part. Don't even know if he's French, doesn't matter.
And of course, the line there is, I think it's a deterrent. Right, you're a lawyer, mate. It isn't. Sorry to break the bad news to the Prime Minister. It's a deterrent. Demonstrably, it is not a deterrent. Since he uttered those words, tens of thousands more people have made their way into the United Kingdom. Smashing the gangs means absolutely diddly.
You will have helped to smash the gangs. Take those gangs down. Smashing the gangs. No shortcut. Smash the criminal gangs. No gimmicks. Have to smash those gangs. Just the hard graft of sleeves rolled up. Smash the gangs. Practical government. I think smashing the gangs is a deterrent. We will smash the gangs that undermine our security. Smash the gangs. Smash the people smuggling gangs.
Oh dear.
He couldn't even smash an avocado for a piece of toast, could he, that fool?
When he says, I think smashing the gangs is a deterrent, well, it might be if you smashed any, if you found any.
Well, one of those was actually when I interviewed Keir Starmer before he became Prime Minister, and he said that smashing the gangs was a deterrent. It wasn't a deterrent then. It's not a deterrent now. There is no deterrent. Rwanda, imperfect, was a deterrent.
And he hasn't smashed anything. I mean, he's literally, all he does is he smashes records every sort of couple of weeks, where more and more people come in a period of 24 hours. I don't understand. Also, when he started with all that, smashing the gang stuff, we didn't know quite how much of a liar he was going to turn out to be, and how many untruths he was going to speak in such a short space of time as a year. We now get to a stage where pretty much everybody doesn't believe a word he says.
Every now and again you get an event that is so shocking, it kind of changes the nation. That happened last July in the lovely seaside town of Southport up in Lancashire.
And just to bring you some breaking news as well, police have declared a major incident in Southport after reports of a stabbing and a number of reported casualties. The emergency services are in Southport following a major incident this morning, Monday the 29th. The armed police have detained a male and seized a knife. He's been taken to a police station. Please avoid the area, they say, while we deal with this incident. There's no wider threat to the public. And of course, we'll bring you more on that story as we get it.
And we all knew palpably, didn't we? We knew what the story was going to be. We knew in our hearts what the motivation was. We knew why those little girls had been targeted, and what transpired, the gaslighting, the lying, the name-calling, the manipulation. Never have I ever seen any government anywhere behave with such little shame. It was disgusting.
The events today are just truly awful, and I know the whole country is deeply shocked at what they've seen and what they've heard. And I know I speak for everybody in the whole country in saying our thoughts and condolences with the victims, their families, their friends and the wider community.
Young children wiped out in the most barbaric fashion.
It wasn't clear who the assailant was. There was hardly any detail that came out once we knew what had happened, but we knew that something very serious had happened, and you could tell by the reaction of the local community that they knew that something really serious had happened.
Axel Rudakabana killed 3 little girls and injured far more, and their teachers at a Taylor Swift-themed dance class during last year's summer holidays. It was the most horrific event, outrage and absolute nation.
And as the summer heat kind of got to them, people started taking to the streets. Keir Starmer also went up to Southport and spent about 19 seconds there, effectively, laying some flowers down with Yvette Cooper.
How many more children are going to die in our streets, Prime Minister? How many more children? How many more children, Prime Minister? Are we going to do something? Time for change, Starmer. Come on, it's needed. How many more children? Is it mine next? Bye-bye. Got your photos, off you go. Make a real change, Prime Minister. Make a real change! Our children!
I remember him being heckled and thinking, this is really bad for the Prime Minister, this is really bad for the country, because you could see ordinary people, family members of, in some cases, some of the girls who were in the dance class, shouting at the Prime Minister of this country, saying, when are you going to speak, turn around and speak to us, you know, face us, talk to us. And he literally didn't know what to do, and he turned around and he walked away. And that was the beginning of the ill feeling, and then just started to build and build and build, and suddenly there were people on the streets, and then suddenly there were police on the streets, and then it just went from bad to worse.
A large crowd has gathered outside a mosque in Southport following this knife attack. Police, riot vans and officers are standing guard outside the building amid chants of "No surrender" and "English till I die." Smoke is now rising from the charming seaside resort of Southport. Riots going on, bricks being thrown, missiles, wheelie bins. It is looking extremely violent there, extremely violent.
Lots of misinformation had gone out on social media, and nobody is supporting any of that. I mean, it was ridiculous. It was sort of invented fake news of the worst kind.
Look, I don't think that anyone should have gone out on the streets to riot, but it was absolutely understandable how angry people were. And it wasn't just about those little girls being murdered in their school holidays by Axel Cabana. It was also about the lies, the lack of information that we were getting from the authorities and from Keir Starmer.
The police decided they had to issue a statement to say that it wasn't an asylum seeker, that it wasn't somebody who'd come on a small boat, and instead they described the person that they'd arrested, without naming him, I think, at the first instance, as somebody who was from Wales and who was painted very much as a maybe a bit of a lone wolf.
So we had this picture being built, just a Welsh lad who moved north, and Keir Starmer was complicit in that. The Merseyside police were shockers on it, the Crown Prosecution Service, they all got together to essentially lie to us.
And so a lot of information was given out by the police, which turned out to be not entirely honest, shall we say. I mean, it wasn't dishonest, but it wasn't the whole truth. And so people got more and more worked up.
There must have been a COBRA meeting when it was discovered that there was ricin in that boy's house. When there was an Al-Qaeda manual, he would have known.
No,
and he didn't.
He knew on day one.
But they said it wasn't terrorist related. They said that it wasn't in any way connected to any kind of religious affiliation.
I have to say there are one or two questions. Was this guy being monitored by the security services? Some reports say he was, others less sure. The police say it's a non-terror incident, just as they said the stabbing of an Army Lieutenant Colonel in uniform on the streets of Kent the other day was a non-terror incident. I just wonder whether the truth is being withheld from us. I don't know the answer to that, but I think it is a fair and legitimate question. What I do know is something is going horribly wrong.
The one politician who did stand up and say, look, they're keeping something from us, and we know they are, and they need to talk to us about it. He was accused of starting all the riots.
There were demonstrations, counter-demonstrations in other places where Muslims were kind of standing around going after white people. It was a terrible time, because the whole country seemed like it was a tinderbox and it was about to explode. And there were community tensions from Southport to Birmingham, and it was spreading all over the country.
Starmer got praise for the way he calmed ended those riots. Now, they needed to be ended, but I don't think he deserves praise for the way he went about it. That's where he got his nickname Two-Tier Keir, because there was this strange new strain of British justice.
But the police, in some cases, were letting Muslim communities off with behaving in whichever way they wanted to do, but they were rounding up the white working class British, and he was calling them far-right thugs, and they were getting locked up.
I utterly condemn the far-right thuggery we've seen this weekend. Be in no doubt, those that have participated in this violence will face the full force of the law. The police will be making arrests, individuals will be held on remand, charges will follow, and convictions will follow. I guarantee you will regret taking part in this disorder whether directly or those whipping up this action online and then running away themselves. This is not protest. It is organised, violent thuggery.
Lucy Connolly is the wife of a Conservative councillor who was watching the story as it unfolded after those little girls were killed, and she was in Northampton, quite a long way away from Southport. But she, like a lot of people, became very upset very quickly. She had had a death in the family. She'd lost one of her own children, and she said later that she'd been sort of triggered by what had happened to these little girls who were all under the age of 10, who had been brutally murdered. And because of what she'd read on the internet and what she'd seen on social media, she was convinced, like many people were, that this had been the work of an illegal migrant. And so she tweeted a message that said something like, burn down all the migrants in the hotels for all I care. If that makes me racist, so be it. She was arrested. She never saw freedom from that point on. She was held on remand by the police. They told her that if she pleaded guilty to a charge of whatever it was that they told her to plead guilty to, that the court would be lenient on her. As it turned out, she did all of those things. She was taken away from her family. She had, I think, a 12-year-old daughter. Her husband was suffering from cancer at the time. She never really saw her daughter for quite a long time. She was then sentenced to 31 months in prison, practically 3 years in prison, for a tweet, effectively.
A nasty, horrible tweet that she should be ashamed of, but deleted it a few hours later, but ended up having to basically plead guilty to charges that led to a 31-month prison sentence. It is absolutely absurd that she serves more time behind bars than someone who actually has committed violence on the streets. And she was just the first of many, many cases we have seen over the past year under Labour of two-tier justice.
You do not send people to jail, even under these circumstances, for 31 months for a tweet, no matter how awful you thought it was.
About 385 people ended up in jail literally within 2 weeks of those riots, while everyone else waiting for trial waits 2 years.
But the other thing is, the great thing about live reporting, we saw what was going on the streets. We saw Muslim gangs rampaging around with weapons, being told, put them back in the mosque, lads.
If there's any weapons or anything like that, what I would do is discard them in the mosque, leave them here. And you don't give anybody any reason or have any interaction with the police, negative interaction. That's my belief. If there's any weapons, get rid of them.
We saw with our own eyes one cohort of people essentially being told, oh, we'd rather you don't do that, and then another cohort being snatched up, taken straight to the cells, held there. There are people held in prison cells for 2, 3, 4 days.
Oh, yeah, we can go through the list of the people that don't go to prison in this world for the most awful offences.
Paedophiles get less. People were saying, hang on, how is it possible for this woman, this housewife effectively, who actually ran, I think, a creche for kids of all different colours and hues and political persuasions and ethnic minorities. How has she been locked up for nearly 3 years? And two-tier justice came from that one incident, because clearly there was one rule for what Keir Starmer thought were far-right thugs and one rule for everybody else. And then he punched him some more, and then you could see him walking off, and you could hear people saying, that's our MP, that's our MP, I'm sure it is. Well, so when Keir Starmer got elected, he was going to be different from every other sleazy Prime Minister there'd ever been. He spent a great deal of time having a go at Boris Johnson for sleaze, and spending a great deal of time having a go at Rishi Sunak for it as well, and Liz Truss. Everybody who in the Conservative Party was on the take. He said he was going to have a government of service.
It normally takes a government a few years to have a few scandals, but it only took a matter of weeks for this government to manage them.
Barely 6 weeks into Keir Starmer's time as Prime Minister, the first big scandal erupted. Lord Ali, a Labour donor very close to Keir Starmer, he'd lent him his flat, for example. He'd lent Angela Rayner a flat in New York. He had been supplying clothes for Keir Starmer and his wife, Victoria, and even glasses as well.
First of all, it's like, who bought your bins there, Sakia? Is that your little mate in charge of ASOS who's in and out of number 10 and he doesn't actually have a job? Oh, giving you his apartment as well, has he? What's going on there?
The kind of person that apparently, Labour frontbenchers for years had told us, oh, we don't know people like this, but they did. And it turns out that Keir Starmer had a wardrobe busier than David Beckham's.
Still looks like a bundle of crap tied up in the middle,
know,
doesn't
right?
he? So next time, Keir, get him to give you some bit more money.
And then it turned out that his wife's dresses were bought by Lord Ali. We don't know whether he bought her underwear as well, but that was certainly mentioned. It then turns out that Angela Rayner had spent some time in Lord Ali's apartment in New York, where I think she'd gone with one of her boyfriends to have a, what we used to call Ugandan discussion with him while she was touring around in Manhattan.
Is there anyone in this Labour government who has ever paid for anything themselves?
That consumed and obsessed the nation for at least a month. The number of freebies that these people were accepting. Yeah. As I always say, in politics, there is nothing more terrifying than the spectre of a socialist with an expense account.
And then it turned out that that wasn't the end of it. Lord Ali's got a nice house down in Kent, I think it is, where they would have parties, where they all went. He also had a penthouse or two in Covent Garden, where it turns out that Keir Starmer had spent quite a lot of time. We still don't really know what he was doing there.
But the scandals kept on coming.
And then if that wasn't bad enough, all the free tickets, the free clothes, it was then all about the CVs.
Oh, yeah,
half of them had lied about what they'd done in their lives.
So Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, quite a colourful character. Doesn't sound very colourful, obviously. Speaks a bit like Starmer in that kind of clipped manner, fixing the foundations and all that. It became clear quite early on that she was, shall we say, a little bit economical with the truth when it came to her previous history in work.
We had a Chancellor of the Exchequer who didn't know what job she had done for many years at HBOS, at Halifax Bank of Scotland. She was in the complaints department, not an economist, and didn't even know how long she'd worked at the Bank of England. 10 years as an economist, we were told. Well, actually, it was 5.
Did she work on the counter at the TSB in Bromley? Did she once serve me a Knickerbocker Glory in the Wimpy? I wasn't sure.
She said, for example, that she worked at the Bank of England for 10 years. And it turned out she only worked for the Bank of England for about 5 and a bit years.
We were told most of 10 years. Well, I'm most of 10 feet tall, but I'm certainly not 10 feet tall. And Rachel Reeves, I think her credibility took a big blow when that all emerged.
As if someone's not going to actually look into that.
And all of this would be fine if we were discussing the work experience person that was coming in as a new job and hoping to get some kind of permanent gig. This is the Chancellor of the Exchequer. She's in charge of all the money, for God's sake.
She also said she was an economist.
She was an intern.
She said she was an economist at the Halifax, wasn't it? She wasn't. That's when she was Rachel from Complaints, I do believe.
Then you've got Jonathan Reynolds, who kept saying, in front of Parliament, back when I was a lawyer, living in Manchester.
Solicitor.
Mate, you never qualified.
Yeah.
Before the last election, I worked as a solicitor in Manchester City Centre, and I would travel in to Manchester every day from what is now my constituency.
And I thought this fellow was one step away from Rumpole of the Bailey. I thought this is one of our biggest lawyers, surely. Must be, because it said it there. There he was, a solicitor. Turns out the flaw in the issue was this. He wasn't a solicitor.
I made a reference to my experience of using our local transport system in Greater Manchester when I worked as a solicitor in Manchester City Centre. I should have made clear that specifically, Madam Deputy Speaker, that was a reference at the time to being a trainee solicitor. I would like to formally correct the record.
Because it's quite an important thing to pretend to be. It's a bit like saying, I'm a pilot or I'm a doctor. I'm a solicitor, therefore I'm a very well-trusted man. And it turns out that, like a lot of these Labour politicians, he didn't just say it once. He said it continually. And he said it for about 10 years.
We have a business secretary who apparently wasn't sure whether he was ever a trained solicitor. I think I'd know if I'd completed my training to be a lawyer.
He had to apologise to the House, and he's been warned by the Solicitors Watchdog Board. You ever say that again, and we will prosecute you.
He actually spent apparently an entire evening sitting next to Luke Johnson, who's quite an important guy in the general scheme of things in the world of politics. And Luke Johnson said that he spent the entire night telling me what it was like being a solicitor. So it wasn't as if he just said it once and kind of went, nah, that's what I used to do. He actually lived off it.
Yet again, Labour frontbench lying about a CV. They said all of this was over, they'd be straightforward with the public. They weren't.
I mean, these are people who I would consider to be too incompetent to, you know, serve me a drink in my local bar, let alone run the economy and run government policy. It's absolutely terrifying.
And then you've got low-grade Louise with the sort of like, you know, the missing phone. I got mugged and my phone got stolen. Oh, look, it's in my drawer. Sorry. It's like, come on.
Yeah, sorry.
Pull the other one.
She's a fraudster, a convicted fraudster.
I think he's, you know, sort of taking the idea of a constituent being in surgery a little bit too literally there.
You see, back in the day, if you had a disagreement with your constituency MP, you'd go to see them at the surgery and then you'd politely shake hands and he would say, you know, I'm very sorry, sir, you know, on this occasion we agree to disagree, and off you'd go on your merry way. Not Mike Amesbury, he'd just punch your lights out for the trouble. Man, what was he thinking at this point? Apparently, well, I'm assuming he had a couple of bevies or whatever the heck it was, but this is, you know, he went in for the proper strike there. This was no, like, dallying around. It wasn't a sort of gentle shove or, you know, don't do that to me, you know, how very dare you. It was none of that. He smacked the fella in the bracket. No messing around.
It's always good when MPs connect with their constituents, but probably not in the way of thumping them in the face.
Apparently they were having a row about a bridge in the constituency. And Amesbury wasn't happy about something the guy said.
I think, as I recall, he was shouting at this guy.
Do you know I'm your MP or something like that?
What do you think of your MP now?
What are you doing?
I mean, I remember seeing it on the night that it happened, because social media being what it is, there was all sorts of videos flying around. And you could just see this obviously drunken man, middle-aged man, shouting at this guy, "You won't threaten me again." And then he punched him some more. And then you could see him walking off, and you could hear people saying, "That's our MP. That's our MP. I'm sure it is."
We've seen MPs thumping people before, John Prescott way back in the day, but this was very, very different, and of course led to that crucial by-election. As we have the breaking news that Sue Gray has resigned as Chief of Staff to Keir Starmer. That is confirmed. She has resigned as number 10 Downing Street Chief of Staff, the controversial former civil servant who's lasted just 13 weeks in the job.
It's a question that lurks around Westminster to this day. Who was Sue Gray? To the point that you sometimes wonder, did she really exist? Was Sue Gray just a figment of our imagination? Because you hear about these people, and then the sort of headlines around them are that they somehow harbour an inner brilliance that most people simply haven't got. They can take decision-making to levels that we just simply cannot reach.
This is a woman who was genuinely described as one of the cleverest people anybody had ever met. A woman of great integrity, I think, were the phrases that they were used for her.
I mean, this person is clearly going to be one of the most influential names in British politics outside elected MPs in our history. And then 16 weeks later, they fired her.
She was tasked with basically creating the first 100 days of Labour's new government, and which was all going really, really well, except for the fact that she didn't make the first 100 days of Keir Starmer's government, because she got left, I think, on day 93, because what happened was that she got involved in a bit of an argument and a kind of a clash of personalities with a guy called Morgan McSweeney, who is now the sort of supposedly the eminent grease inside of Downing Street. He's supposed to be the genius behind Keir Starmer, which, I mean, if it's all down to him, then he can't be that much of a genius. So he basically won the argument. She's now been catapulted off to the House of Lords, and I think she's now called rather grandly a special envoy to the Prime Minister, but I've no idea what she does.
I mean, if there was a book called The Dictionary of U-Turns, this would be number one in the book, and it came from a Labour government.
As I've just said, I didn't want to have to deal with the winter fuel allowance for pensioners. But we have to fix the NHS. We have to fix our homes, our schools. And pensioners rely on them in the same way as everybody else does. So I'm not going to preempt the budget, but I'm absolutely not going to accept that the inheritance that we have isn't anything other than dire, a £22 billion black hole.
We were left a £22 billion black hole for this year in the public finances. Those are numbers, and that was spending covered up by the previous Conservative government.
Rachel Reeves was staggering around looking for something to blame on the Tories. And she discovered, so much to her delight, what she regarded as the excuse for everything that would then be given for everything that went wrong. And that was the famous £22 billion black hole, which nobody's ever really found and nobody's ever really believed, but it exists only in the mind of every Labour politician.
She argued and has continued to argue that there was a £22 billion black hole, and that has been the context for all the financial decisions Labour have made in the last year, whether it is the winter fuel allowance, whether it's to do with the Chagos Islands, or whether it's to do with welfare. These big controversial issues, Labour says there's just no money and they've got to make a decision on that basis.
And whenever she was challenged, it's the £22 billion black hole, I think you'll find.
Fairly soon afterwards, the Financial Times, which I think you can take seriously on financial issues, said there's no such thing.
Right, they did an FOI and asked the OBR, that's a lot of acronyms, isn't it? Like, where is it in the calculations? And everyone's like, yeah, no, it's not really there.
It doesn't exist. They used it as an excuse, for some reason, to bring in these cruel and ruthless policies, the farmers' inheritance tax, and of course the winter fuel allowance, which they axed for reasons no one can understand to this day.
The mad thing is they come into government and they go, there's this 22 billion black hole, which we all now know is sort of mythical, it never existed.
Didn't exist, yeah.
And the first thing is like, right, we're going to give everybody in the public sector massive pay rises, and we're going to give Ed Miliband £8 billion so he can buy Wim-Woms.
We've got clips, because you always do, of Keir Starmer some months earlier, I think in May of last year, accusing Rishi Sunak of threatening to cancel the winter fuel allowance for pensioners because of a £54 billion black hole in public sector finances. So if you knew about the £54 billion black hole, how did you not know about the £22 billion black hole that came some weeks later? And of course, even more bizarrely, it turns out that it wasn't so much Rishi Sunak who was going to take the winter fuel allowance away from pensioners. It was actually Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves, that it lost them massively support across the country. It lost them massively when they had the local by-elections in May of this year.
As the economy improves, we want to make sure people feel those improvements in their days as their lives go forward. And that is why we want to ensure that as we go forward, more pensioners are eligible for winter fuel payments.
This, I would argue, is the most controversial thing Keir Starmer has done. He's now done a U-turn on it. At the time, charities like Age UK were talking about 200,000, 300,000 people who would be in fuel poverty as a result. But many, many millions more weren't going to get the winter fuel allowance that they got for years.
I mean, if there was a book called The Dictionary of U-Turns, this would be #1 in the book. And it came from a Labour government that decided to take a load of money from pensioners. In fact, not even just rich pensioners, but frankly, almost anyone. If you earned over about 11.5 grand a year, Big Rach was coming for you.
A Prime Minister who talked about 10-year plan of what he wanted to do, barely able to make it through a week without a U-turn, without changing his mind, changing a policy, watering down a policy.
And so then they decided to go after the farmers. And the farmers who traditionally have pretty much stayed out of politics because they just want to be left alone. They suddenly found themselves driving tractors up Whitehall and driving tractors all over the place and making all kinds of representations to the government because they're going to take their inheritance tax break away, which means that if they want to pass their farm from father to son, they're basically not going to be able to afford to do it.
Farmers were really, really angry with Labour because of the decision they made on inheritance tax. Essentially, it meant that farmers who could have previously given all their land and passed it down without inheritance tax had to pay it. That meant values of farms, the whole way farms were run had to change. Huge anger, protests on the streets of Westminster, and it still, as an issue, isn't really solved.
Going after farmers, I mean, what on earth are they thinking? First of all, food security, really important when you're spending a load of money trying to stop Houthis from nuking, cargo ships bringing food and fuel from elsewhere. Might be a good idea to have our own food and fuel. No, I know. Let's tax farmers so they'll give over their land so Ed Miliband can cover them in bits of plastic bought from slave labour in China.
Britain has come to a deal with Mauritius over the Chagos Islands. They've handed the Indian Ocean Territory to Mauritius. The islands were British-owned from 1840. They have now been signed away by Keir Starmer's government.
For a long time, the Foreign Office has been trying to get successive governments to give the Chagos Islands to Mauritius. They say there's a security concern and there's a risk that there could be legal ramifications if we don't. Keir Starmer, ever the lawyer, listened to that advice in a way that other Prime Ministers like Boris Johnson didn't, negotiated a deal that means that most of the Chagos Islands are now under Mauritius's control, but we're actually paying, we the taxpayer, are paying billions a year to lease back a few of them, including Diego Garcia, which is a military base.
Now, for most people in Britain, they'd never heard of the Chagos Islands, right? I mean, I had heard of them because we'd, funnily enough, been talking to people from Chagos from years and years and years before. But ridiculously, as a priority, and one of the first things the government did was they said they were going to sell off the Chagos Islands. And we go, well, why?
I mean, the whole Chagos Islands thing, it didn't need to happen. It was some sort of flimmy-flommy, woke bit of legal advice. It wasn't even breaking international law. And then they're like, I know, let's not just give the Chagos Islands to Mauritius, who've got nothing to do with the Chagos Islands, but seem to like to host China. And it was actually one of the Chinese judges who came up with this idea of giving those islands away. Yeah. But we're now paying Mauritius for the privilege.
So there's no alternative but to act in Britain's national interest. By agreeing to this deal now on our terms, we're securing strong protections, including from malign influence, that will allow the base to operate well into the next century, helping to keep us safe for generations to come. Now, other approaches to secure the base have been tried over the years, and they have failed. Boris Johnson failed in his efforts to endlessly delay. Liz Truss then started the negotiations. We inherited a negotiation in which the principle of giving up UK sovereignty had already been conceded by the previous Tory government. Our deal has concluded those negotiations in the national interest.
The most horrific scandal that's ever befallen this country, ever in history.
So first few days in office, and they already know, they've got a crime problem in the country. And how do you solve a crime problem? What do you do to address criminality? Cracking idea. Release 40,000 criminals onto the street.
Now, there's only, I think, about 80,000 people in prison in the whole of the country. So they're literally talking about releasing half of the prisoners that they've got. Why? In order to put more prisoners in. So it was kind of a flawed argument at the beginning.
I mean, come on now. I mean, you really couldn't get two fingers up at the government. Worse optics than that.
Oh, that's nice, Keir Starmer, isn't it? Street boys. He's the Prime Minister. He's the one that let you out. He's the one that got you out. Yeah.
Respect to him, man.
Yeah, man. Take it easy, boy. Nice one speaking to me, right, kids. Sam, where you from? Blackburn. Shout out Blackburn.
Respect, man.
Respect to start. Honestly, and they've had to do that. What is it? Twice or 3 times?
At least they've just discovered there's one extra Labour voter than they thought they had.
The idea that the way you deal with this to solve the problem, make it all go away, just release a load of criminals. I mean, these were some horrendous criminals: domestic violence, sexual abuse. Really, this was not somebody who nicked a biro out of Smith's. These were people that had done very bad stuff and were being released early.
And the optics of it were ridiculous, because instead of doing it relatively quietly, they sort of announced that they were doing it on this one particular day. And so we were watching it live, and I think we had a camera outside Brixton Prison in London. And every now and again the door would open and this lag would sort of appear. And sometimes it would be a sort of an older looking guy with a couple of black dustbin bags. Another time it would be another bloke with a suitcase. Another guy would come out and be embraced warmly by somebody. And then as the picture around the country started to appear, you were people coming out to bottles of champagne. People were popping champagne corks outside the prison. And they all looked like bad guys. These guys did not look like they'd won the lottery. They looked like they were drug dealers. Another guy got picked up in a Lamborghini. And there was another guy in a Rolls Royce, I seem to remember. You know, it was literally like something out of Gotham City of Batman. You know, all these bad guys just coming out of jail. And of course, at least 25% of them went back in again.
If it's a right-wing person, you know, who's been rioting, suddenly miraculously, there's room.
Oh, the machine suddenly clunks
there's
into
room
gear then,
in the
doesn't
prison.
it?
If it's the right kind of prisoner, Starmer and the gang can find them a cell. If it's a poor, underprivileged bank robber or poor, underprivileged paedophile, oh, we'll let them out. Oh, it's a far-right thug, put them in jail. You know, it's ridiculous.
On behalf of this and past governments and the many public authorities who let you down, I want to reiterate an unequivocal apology for the unimaginable pain and suffering that you have suffered and the failure of our country's institutions through decades to prevent that harm and keep you safe.
Little did we know that waiting in the wings was a U-turn that will never be surpassed in terms of a government changing its mind. And that, of course, was the inquiry into grooming gangs. Now, this is one of the most serious elements and areas of our history. It's disturbing, it's been left alone, people have left it largely unattended.
It wasn't a surprise to me that Keir Starmer decided to U-turn on the grooming gang scandal. This was a subject which exploded.
The most sickening, disgusting thing that I've seen this government do was the cover-up, and it is a cover-up, I'm sorry, over the grooming gangs, the rape gangs. How dare our Prime Minister turn around and say calls for a national inquiry into a sexual genocide, the most horrific scandal that's ever befallen this country, ever in history. Yeah. And he turns around and says that the mass systemic targeting, rape, torture, abuse, even murder of little white girls in this country at the hands of Muslim men, that having an inquiry into that is people jumping on a far-right bandwagon. He's got something to hide, I'm sure of it. I think the Labour Party is in hot water over this one.
Grooming gangs have been around as long as anybody can remember, going all the way back to Tony Blair's time, going all the way back to 2009 when Keir Starmer was Director of Public Prosecutions, and even before that, the terrible, terrible blight of what these Pakistani sex rape gangs, I suppose we should call them, have been doing in a lot of northern towns like Oldham, like places like Doncaster, like Rochdale, like Rotherham. All sorts of terrible things, horrendous things going on.
Well, that's why they were so reticent, Keir was so reticent to agreeing to a national public inquiry. Now, I'm reluctant to embrace the idea of public inquiries about anything because they're usually a waste of time, very expensive, and they go on for about 40 years. But there are certain issues where you can see no other way out than a proper, full national investigation.
So the story came up again, not because of anything Keir Starmer did or of anything Labour said, but because of Elon Musk, of all people. Elon Musk picked up on some of the chatter that was going on social media, on X in particular, and he started poking the Prime Minister, and started poking the government and saying, you know, you're locking people up for free speech endeavours, you're locking people up for saying things, but you're not locking up these horrible perpetrators of rape. And it suddenly started to pick up and get to a point where Keir Starmer had to make a statement about it all, and he had to say that he was going to ask Jess Phillips, the MP from I think she's a Home Office MP, isn't she? Somewhere along the line, where she's going to be able to make a statement about whether or not there's going to be a national inquiry. Because people started saying we need a national inquiry into this, we need to look at exactly why all of these Labour-run councils turned a blind eye to all of this stuff for years and years and years and years. And so many victims were coming forward, telling their stories through the Maggie Oliver Foundation, which was a fantastic operation, who's obviously been on with us many times. And Jess Phillips gets up just before Easter, just before the Easter recess, with about half an hour to go in parliamentary time, and blithely announces that there's not going to be a national inquiry into the grooming gangs because we don't need one.
Despite the industrial scale nature, the thousands of victims, the frankly conveyor belt like way that local authorities, whether it was in education, whether it was in health, whether it was in law enforcement, simply ignored it. Child abuse ignored on an hour-by-hour basis.
It was never tenable for the Prime Minister to say, no, we won't have a national inquiry. We've already had one. We hadn't already had one into the grooming gangs. And to say that just some local towns and cities would have local inquiries. Given that the cover-up of the grooming gang scandal was largely done by local Labour councils in those towns and cities, that was never, ever going to wash. And this was yet another example, not only of a U-turn by the Prime Minister, but a predicted and predictable U-turn.
Despite the victims being there, despite the witnesses being there, despite the evidence being there, this was ignored. And the chance to address this was there for Keir Starmer. Realising that there'd already been an inquiry, he said, no, we don't need another one. And then comes that U-turn, when he suddenly decides, yeah, we're actually going to have a U-turn now. And this was only really because parties like Reform UK were hot on the heels, really making, rightly so, a lot of noise about this. It's extraordinary that any MP anywhere in the Labour Party was disagreeing with this, and some really were, still to this day, were ignoring it and say, no, we don't need another inquiry. You absolutely do. It was embarrassing. There's no house points for Keir Starmer, the fact that he changed his mind. It simply tells you that it's a government that lacks an idea of what, firstly, individuals want, secondly, what priorities should look like, and thirdly, what is right for victims.
Why wouldn't you think that it was necessary to have a proper national public inquiry into the scandal of tens of thousands of young women and girls being raped and groomed? The idea that you don't think that's something you want to investigate when you yourself were former Director of Public Prosecutions is beyond belief, I think, for most voters.
Now, could you sum up Labour's first year in office in just one word?
So they've been in office for a year. I'm trying to think of something good that's happened, and I'm struggling.
Labour's first year in power has been an exercise in abject incompetence. I have never ever known a government, and I've been around a long time and watched a lot of governments and questioned a lot of government ministers. I have never ever seen a government with so little pre-planning, so little policy making, so few ideas, so little ability to get anything done, so little thought through.
Labour's first year in office is a really toxic, scary blend of intransigence, arrogance, absolute incompetence and deceit. Brazen deceit. I have never known a government with so little moral fibre, so little nous, so dangerous to the integrity, the security, the prosperity of our nation than this bunch of fools, these evil, evil idiots.
Okay, I don't think I can beat that. What she said.
It has been one of the most eventful, but not in a good way, in a miserable way. It's been miserably eventful. Almost each day when I kick the quilt off my bed in the morning, I just think, what kind of tiresome government-based nonsense is coming our way? That's how we're living our lives now.
I've always thought there was no way of getting rid of Keir Starmer before the full 5 years is up in office. Now, I don't see how he can survive even 2 years.
I'm frightened. I'm frightened about how bad they are. I'm frightened about how deceitful they are. I'm frightened about how they so easily lie. I'm frightened about their incompetence. We've got 4 more years of this. We are going to hell in a handcart under this lot. It's hard to imagine how it could get worse, but folks, I'm afraid to tell you, it's going to get worse.
Useless.
Mediocre.
I think that's the most complimentary one
Right.
we've had so far.
Did Kevin just say